Welcome to the Barrier Breakdown, Disrupting Mental Health podcast, where we talk about the clinical and practical issues that face those working in the mental health industry.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Barrier Breakdown. My name is Erin Molyneux-Bailey. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Cognitive Behavior Institute, and my co-host, Dr. Kevin Caridad, who is the CEO and owner of Cognitive Behavior Institute. And on this week's episode, we are joined by Michelle Butcher, who is a certified divorce mediator and licensed professional counselor with over 15 years of experience in the counseling field. Michelle has recently co-founded the newly launched Center for Mediation at CBI, and we are super excited to have one of our own here today to join us, Michelle. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So could you tell us and our listeners a little bit about what your interest is in divorce mediation and what led you to become a certified divorce mediator?
Sure. So over the course of 15 years of seeing patients, I've kind of navigated my niche into really developing a strong passion for couples work. I started to realize that the more and more I could support couples in reunification and staying together, that the support on the opposing end of that with finding a way to separate or end the relationship just wasn't there. I actually really enjoy the part of this that is disarming the conflict, where couples have a really difficult time. You tell a married couple, one partner mentions divorce, and it seems catastrophic for the most part. So I myself, in my younger days, I'm a product of divorce, and I myself have been divorced, and I've had two very different experiences in that regard. When my parents got divorced, it was how not to divorce. And when I divorced, it was very much an amicable prioritization of our kids, and I knew it could be done. So, over the last probably 3 or 4 years, I started more and more realizing that there was a lacking support for the couples who just wanted to be the author or wanted to have, a primary say in how their divorce went. So I did some research, took my time, and found a program. In the midst of COVID, we find ourselves having a little more time than typical. So I found a program that I could participate in that was accessible, and just kind of went for it.
That's awesome. Now tell us a little bit of all the training that you did go through to become the certified divorce mediator. We know a lot of hours went into that, and it's really a specialty, really a niche that you're part of now.
Sure. So it's approximately a 40 direct hour training. So there are mediators throughout the course of the training that I participated in with conflict resolutions. Susan Devaney was the founder. She's 38 years as an attorney, upstate New York, Rhode Island area. So she developed this amazing training with other divorce mediator who were certified. Some of them had law backgrounds, some of them had financial backgrounds. And then a fair amount of the people that I experienced were counselors or social workers. So it was about 40 hours of a direct training in each of their own areas of expertise. And then we were required outside of those face-to-face trainings to spend, anywhere from 2 to 4 hours developing skill sets that we were then asked to, provide a mock interaction on that they could, that our mediators or moderators, I guess, could see. And then we were required to develop, from a template, yes and no. It was really just kind of a one-page, don't forget all of these things. At the end of the divorce mediation process, what a couple gains is something called the Memorandum of Understanding, which has all of the set points that a couple wants in their divorce, that is brought before a judge, that is utilized and submitted as a legal document that gets a couple divorced. So all in, probably 60 to 65 hours of training, both direct and indirect, kind of went into getting the certification.
It sounds like, we know as mental health providers, divorce can be one of the largest stresses in one's life. And when you go a path of within a pandemic or otherwise, getting divorced, the marital hospice routes could be a lot more comfortable than going the route of war. And so what are the from a therapist perspective, what do you think of the benefits of marital hospice or the mediation piece on the individuals doing it, meaning it either one of the spouses, or with regard to children involved, or even any nuances, and say the LGBTQ community that may need mediation. What are your thoughts about that?
Right. So, I think if anybody kind of even, movie screen sees a divorce, there's oftentimes somebody speaking, i.e. an attorney or legal representative speaking on behalf of a client, mostly with feedback from a client, sometimes not always. It can get very litigious between two attorneys. Maybe they have a history, maybe they've been up against each other and maybe don't work so cohesively. So when a couple looks at, as Kevin, as you said, marital hospice or looking at mediation services, they then can develop, or they can write the narrative for what they want their divorce to look like. It is much more quote unquote friendly, I guess, if that's not much of an oxymoron in the sentence of divorce. But they really get to be the authors of what their divorce looks like. There's not necessarily any one person making their decision. There's somebody mediating, exactly what that word means, kind of coming in to a situation with a couple and saying, okay, it's the give and take, right? I once had an experience where there was a couple divorcing, and their sticking point for probably 8 months was an antique tea cart. And there was a lot of history behind it for both of them. And, and as the story goes, neither one of them were willing to bend or give, and they were willing to invest the money to fight for the tea cart. And, with a little bit of discussion, I think it was more emotional than it necessarily was material. And so, it's that process of just saying, like, fair and equitable. You'll hear that a lot, making it fair and equitable, and making sure that both parties walk away feeling that they were heard, and that they can walk away, if they're going to have to walk away from their marriage, at least walking away without, a really nasty negative feeling about their spouse, especially if they have kids involved. That's a lifelong interaction. You're very rarely going to be able to dodge your ex-spouse, let's say graduations, birthdays, weddings, things like that. So, it really is helpful to have somebody just kind of put out the fires along the process. So, yeah.
So the mediator is really taking the time to let everybody talk, be heard, decrease that emotional intensity so that they get better clarity to really see as they're getting the input with the mediator and supporting each other. They have actually greater control and ultimately better outcomes and improved costs because they're not using all those lawyers.
Right. Yeah. And that's another, sometimes we have to, include the business of divorce, right? Mediation oftentimes is about a third less the cost than what litigation would be. You are paying several hundred, maybe several $1,000s an hour to have an attorney represent you, and you're putting, faith that they're going to do what's best for you and on your behalf. And then ultimately you could do all of that and get in front of a judge, and a judge then has a final say. So now you've invested, tens of thousands of dollars and may not walk away in feeling good about, the end result. So yeah, it definitely is cost effective. So, on the emotional side, you kind of have this calming sense. And then on the business side of it, you have, you really do, it becomes more cost friendly, to go that route.
Correct.
Michelle, I also have been divorced, so I, like you, know the toll that it takes on a person. You make great points when it comes to both the emotional side and the financial side, because your life is changing in so many ways, and the last thing you want to do is bankrupt yourself, although you may want to do that to your spouse, but typically both happens to both parties. But that's certainly something to take into consideration. Can you also speak a little bit to the piece of mediation where both sides are always together when discussing these topics. It's my understanding that the mediator is not meeting individually with each party. And so there's no kind of behind the scenes or any kind of shadiness, so to speak, going on, because there's no, impartiality to one person.
Right, absolutely. And, part of that is out of respect for both clients. You're coming in to separate from one another. You cannot have one spouse divorcing and the other one just dragging their feet or being resistant. That, not to fast forward, but that'll be part of the who's not fit for divorce or fit for mediation. But, when the initial call comes in, whichever spouse is calling in, we double check to make sure the other spouse is aware that they have initiated this process or have requested this process. It just keeps this he said, she said at bay. There's nothing behind the magic curtain. There's nothing in a surprise box. You will say in front of each party anything you would say in front of the other. Now, other mediators may not do that. I've heard of and known certain folks in the mediation field who are willing to do a one-on-one meet. For myself, I would not do that. It just doesn't feel fair. It doesn't feel cohesive to both parties. So yeah, we make it a point to make sure that both parties are present.
Sounds like a definite higher risk for miscommunication or a fear of alliance of what the mediator and one of the spouses as a high risk, and I can see how that could eliminate that factor at least.
Absolutely. So you don't have, even if one spouse calls in and says, can I talk to Michelle for a minute? I would then say we need to have a conference call, because I've unfortunately seen, when one couple is kind of trying to angle in one way, one person of the couple is trying to angle in one way, and it just doesn't bode well for the end goal, which is to get this couple on the same page and get them divorced.
So it sounds like there's definitely a criteria, so to speak, or a fit of who makes a good fit for mediation versus who would not be a good fit. Could you tell us a little bit about both sides of those?
Sure. So on the end of being a good fit for mediation, you have couples who are in agreement about their divorce, that yes, they are both ready to kind of move on to the next chapter of whatever that might be. Folks who don't have a lot of, extenuating financial investment or liquid assets. I'm not saying that mediation couldn't work, but we then enlist a certified divorce financial analyst to come in, because that can start to get, if you're looking at something like inheritances or, trust fund, things like that, it really starts to get kind of like tit for tat. So, but it definitely can be done. Individuals who are ready to communicate in a pretty amicable way are great candidates for divorce mediation. Anybody who can just say, yeah, the give and take of of a divorce. Those who would not be suited for divorce, anybody in active addiction. You don't want to bring in one spouse who potentially could be impaired during a session of mediation. That kind of makes most things null and void. So anybody who's in active addiction would not be accepted for mediation. Anybody who has, any kind of domestic violence history within the marriage or potentially have a PFA active, obviously they can't be in the same room. And they would need to step outside and either really go fully legal route or maybe get some counseling and then come back to that. Anybody who also has had CYS or, Children and Family Services involved with custody, because we do address custody in the memorandum of understanding. And so if there's a legal matter with custodial issues, those would need to be resolved before moving forward. But for the most part, as long as folks can, come to the table, sit down, be heard, and willing to listen, it really does feel easier to do that. You come in and it's just like everybody sits and you have somebody just kind of probing the question back and forth. And at the end of the day, everybody walks away with a common goal in mind.
Wonderful. That was very helpful. And I think a lot of our clinicians who are listening could probably relate to several of those situations that you discussed just now, so that they know, maybe some of their couples who are good fits for divorce mediation versus some couples who are not. So thanks so much for sharing that with us. Can you just tell us a little bit about how long the average course of mediation takes? Because I know time is money, and time is important when you are working through a large life change such as this. However, I would assume that it could be much quicker than the legal route through the court system when it comes to divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the length of time in mediation really pretty much 95% lies within the couple. So if you can have a couple come in and it's a very do you agree? Do you agree? And everyone's like, yes, that's fine. Yeah, we'll do this. You can get that done in 1 to 2 sessions, which are about 2 to 3 hours, depending on, where you're at by that second day. If you have issues where it's a sticking point, you kind of just put a pin in it. You get the couple and say, can we put a pin in this and let's keep moving? We'll come back to it. Sometimes a couple, that maybe had an issue where it caused a bit of a pause for them. When you kind of go through the other, formalities of, separating assets and division of property and custody, when you go back to it, their guards are down a little bit, and that might be a very quick, okay, yeah, you're right, we should do that. So once the back and forth process with the couple is done, then, we obviously have to develop the memorandum of understanding for them that they can take to the court. That can take anywhere from 7 to 10 days, depending on the depth of, liquid assets, investments, things like that. If it's really kind of a cut and dry situation, that could be done in as quick as 48 to 72 hours and given back to the client. So it all depends. I would say 7 to 10 days tops if you have individuals that can really just kind of get in there and agree and, play nice in the sandbox, if you will. And if not, it's going to be based on how long they're willing to choose the hill to die on. And that sticking point isn't being resolved.
Great analogy. Thank you for that. No, that's wonderful. And we know that for our listeners out there, they can learn more about the CBI Center for Divorce Mediation at www.papsychotherapy.org. And there's a specific title for the Divorce Mediation Center on our website where they can learn lots of information that you just discussed here with us today, as well as send any questions with any emails to the staff at cbipsychotherapy.org if any clients out there are interested in setting up a consultation with Michelle Butcher or with Trevor Stifler, who are both the co-founders of the Center for Divorce Mediation here at CBI.
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for being with us here today. We really appreciate this additional resource that you're able to provide clients who it may be a good fit for them, during a very challenging time in their lives. So thank you so much for joining us today and taking a moment to chat about it.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
All right, wonderful. And thank you so much to our listeners of The Barrier Breakdown. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and stay safe and healthy. Take care.
Thank you for listening to The Barrier Breakdown, Disrupting Mental Health. Listeners can find all of our episodes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Podbean. For more information and to learn about upcoming continuing education events, check out our website, cbicenterforeducation.com, our Facebook pages, Cognitive Behavior Institute and CBI Center for Education, as well as our Instagram at Cognitive Behavior Institute and our Twitter at CBI_Pittsburgh. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We hope you'll tune in for another guest next week.